Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, we'll be discussing my thoughts on Series 10, Episode 9 of Doctor Who, Empress of Mars by Mark Gatiss. And this was really a strange episode for me. From right out of the gate, beginning at NASA headquarters, and building up to finding that message on Mars, all of the final episode of MASH. It was God Save the Queen here, where it was goodbye there, and it really struck me as odd. The entire flavor of the episode was odd to me, and I was kind of actively trying to wrap my mind around what was going on. Not that any of it was really mysterious to me or I wasn't following it, but more so what was the vibe I was getting. I was getting a really strange, oddity-laden vibe, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it until I finally came to the conclusion that what I'm watching is a classic series episode, with the modern cast. Something harkening back to the Troughton era or the Tom Baker era, something like that, was very much the feel and the vibe that I had all throughout this episode. And it was kind of, it was stammering a little bit to really wrap my mind around that at first. Because there was a kookiness to it. There was an aloofness to it. The way Capaldi was portraying the 12th Doctor, very Troughton or Tom Baker-esque. With just his strange, inquisitive nature, his wit, his charm, and his retorts and everything like that. It was very much cut from that kind of cloth. And I've gone ahead and made my, as per usual, list of things this episode reminded me of and such like that I'll be going over as I'm talking about, the episode in reaction. I began my listing with saying I have to say something about just the oddity of that opening, the weirdness of it. And all the movie references to boot, Terminator and The Thing, and that's interesting. I kind of wish if this was going to be something Bill was going to be doing, I kind of wish this was something she had been doing a little bit since the beginning. I just kind of feel like that is an aspect of her character that kind of blindsided us, came out of nowhere. I like that she's sort of geeky. I like that, you go back to the first episode of the series, I think she says she's a little sci-fi, and she thinks in talking to the Doctor, sci-fi ideas and concepts might be a little beyond him before she actually gets to know him. So I guess arguably it was kind of there since the beginning, but we haven't seen it so much so often that it was kind of like, why is she suddenly talking about movies? They're on friggin' Mars and she's talking about movies. You're not going to catch a matinee here, and look who you're talking to, the Doctor. So who knows what he's seen. And the TARDIS, having suddenly began sort of operating on its own. I mean, it reminded me of the fast recall, button configuration, whatever you want to call it. And I began to wonder, because of course where we round out toward the end, Missy's involvement, Nardol's having to go to her. Was this something she somehow set up? Was this the TARDIS acting of its own accord? I don't know. It's arguable. It was strange. There was an oddness to it, adding to that oddness, the odd vibe of the whole oddball episode, if you will. No offense to Mark Gatiss, I really enjoyed it, but it was just kind of like, this is so weird. It feels so wonky, but again, wrapping my mind around it thusly that it is something harkening back to the classic series, it was like, oh, well, okay, I kind of, I'm getting into the swing of it that much more with that in mind. But, more about the TARDIS moving on its own coming up momentarily here. As far as episodes, this really reminded me of the main theme of an alien culture, and not necessarily, the birthing of a culture or the end of a culture, whereas it kind of is more conforming to, you could arguably say, sort of the genesis of the Ice Warriors, or at least the genesis of the Ice Warriors as the Doctor's relationship would develop with them going back in his previous incarnations. But I was reminded heavily of the fifth series two-parter, the Silurian two-parter, The Hungry Earth and Cold Blood, of course, the 11th Doctor, Amy, and I think Rory was in there. And, stumbling across the Silurians and having to barter an agreement between them and humanity. I mean, we've seen this kind of thing before, especially with the Zygons in the last couple of series, as well as the 50th anniversary. And so that really stood out to me. And I sort of loosely categorized most of these as being the caves underground sort of framework of reminding me, beginning with The Hungry Earth, Cold Blood. I did have actually Genesis of the Daleks, because we're dealing with soldiers, granted sort of, soldiers taken out of time, but I was very much reminded of the war, the scope of the battle between the Thals and the Khalids in Genesis of the Daleks. And again, you had underground tunnels and things of that sort, which kind of played into the vibe of this. And also, again, hearkening back to Tom Baker's era, his charm, his wit, and that powerful dilemma he faced in that story of wiping out the Daleks before they actually became a threat, that kind of thing. With that foreknowledge, should he actually act on it, was very much the dilemma of the day, and one of the most compelling sequences in the history of Doctor Who was born out of that, for that reason. As well as calling back on Patrick Troughton, Tomb of the Cybermen is an obvious sort of thing to go to, because you very much had a tomb of Cybermen, where Cybermen, again, underground caves, tunnels, all this kind of stuff, they were very much being awakened by the cyber leader, what have you, and you had humans who were somewhat displaced, not out of time, but they were there investigating, archaeologists and such like that. And here, of course, we had the Empress herself being awoken inadvertently, and awakening her whole chamber / tomb that she was encased in, harkened back to me Rassilon's tomb in the Five Doctors, and just that whole aspect of how greed came into the story, and how, at least in the Five Doctors, it was immortality. But, here we have the soldier who goes in and he's ripping the jewels off the actual tomb, the encasing. And so, yeah, harkened back to the Five Doctors for me for that reason as well. Also, I have listed here the Series 4 episode, The Doctor's Daughter. Again, caves, underground, sort of battle going on between the, humans, displanted humans, against the Hath and whatever like that. And the Doctor's Daughter was born out of that, Jenny, and I hope we see her again someday soon. At some point, I would really be hoping, but the 10th Doctor, Donna and Martha and all of that stuff. And again, all of those really conforming to that aspect of this episode. I will loosely decree as the caves underground vibe, that kind of thing. And, so that's really a lot of those things, a lot of aspects of this story. That's what it was reminding me of. And I didn't, I haven't seen this era of soldiers all too often, if at all, prior to this. I have heard references to Gatiss saying it was like Zulu with Ice Warriors. I've never seen Zulu, so, the uniforms, the iconography looked intriguing to me, interesting to me. And, but I just, I was hard-pressed to really come up with anything that I could personally recall, especially in, Doctor Who, but in anything else ever, really, that conformed closely to the look and the vibe of that, which is why I was seeking that much more broadly to stories that dealt with, humans against aliens, and the Doctor being the grand mediator, and, again, caves and underground environs and things of that sort, And there are stories other than those that I have listed that this reminded me of, that have taken place underground, that have had caves and tunnels involved, but these in particular, again, just to list them off, Hungry Earth, Cold Blood, Genesis of the Daleks, Tomb of the Cybermen, The Doctor's Daughter. These are the ones that I feel more specifically relates to sort of the scenario, the grand scenario that was going on here. And once again, the performances were just stellar. Whereas the episode itself, the story, the pacing, the filming, the direction, kind of felt a little wonky and a little odd and a little off to me, especially in comparison to the grander Series 10 thus far, and of course the previous series since Capaldi has been around, 8 and 9 and such like that. It was just strange, and so it was more the themology, the vibe, the look, the feel, the humans versus the aliens. That, again, that whole thing that just, it seemed to be, that was the root, that was the familiarity. And with those performances, Capaldi channeling sort of, I would say, a hybridization of the Troughton Doctor and Tom Baker's fourth, and Bill, in this case, Promaki, I like that we got to see her once again, even if I felt it was off that she was, spouting off movie references and things of that sort and leading the Doctor to call out Frozen, how many people are going to get that reference and just cringe and roll their eyes? I almost did at that moment. And I still want to see Frozen as a Disney movie fan. I haven't seen it yet as of the time of this recording. But I digress, but seeing that range of emotions and Bill, for her part, as much as she's already seen being out of her element, was intriguing. Where the Doctor finally brings about that confrontation. The guy who had gone rogue. I haven't really paid attention to the names, but of course, the guy who was going to be hung for being a coward, for going AWOL and such like that, being sort of the savior of the day, and his warrior code, his warrior ethics, his soldier ethics, making up for his former cowardice, kind of playing into the Klingon culture, if you're a Star Trek fan, the way of the warrior and things of that nature. I liked that. I liked that aspect of, here was a really wholly alien environment. We have soldiers displaced in time going up against these aliens. And Bill, she's gobsmacked. She's like, what in the hell is going on here? Again, trying to be a voice of reason, as a woman, speaking to her femininity, but also her individuality, her self-respect and her self-courage and all these things. She tried to take the Empress herself to task, and I was proud of her for doing so. It only got her so far, and then in the end, of course, the Doctor's own mentality conforming to that of the soldier, of the warrior, and really having a backwards and forwards understanding of that warrior's culture, that nature, being something that could put him into that position where he's telling Bill, back off, shut up. When the guy who survived having been hung approaches the Empress and gives himself to her, sacrifices his life, killed, the guy who'd gone rogue and everything like that. He impresses upon her his willingness to sacrifice and his honorability. He reclaimed in that moment his honorability. And no longer would he work for Queen and Country, but Empress and planetary living, interplanetary, whatever you want to say. And so that to me was like a saving grace, whereas everything else just kind of seemed wonky and weird. That's really just my vibe of the whole episode. And another thing that was really kind of throwing me off was the Empress, the way she sounded the whole time. I know it's a different actress, but the whole time I was calling back to the Rachnos from The Runaway Bride, the sort of Empress of the Rachnos. The way her voice sounded, and then with the fake teeth in and everything like that. For most of this episode, I was like, is that the actress who played the Rachnos? It sounded so much like her. There was maybe one or two lines, this actress as the Empress of Mars, had delivered that I was like, no, it's not. The rest of the time I was like, actually, like actively curious, thinking, I got to Google this later. I got to see. It's the same actress. Great thing to be thinking instead of really, invested in the story, the wonkiness of the story, the strangeness of it, the oddity of it. And I'm thinking, is that the same actress? It sounds exactly the same almost, through the majority of the episode. I also have listed here, I liked the cool little reference to Tooth and Claw, the second series episode with the 10th Doctor and Billie Piper's Rose, meeting Queen Victoria, and seeing the portrait of her. Again, God save the Queen, Queen and country, yada yada, and all that good stuff. And then, okay, so a dual punch to the gut, a 1-2 to the chops of WTF-ery by the end. WTF-ery as well as awesome sauce. The WTF-ery was surrounding what was going on with the TARDIS. And I mentioned the Doctor's daughter. If you remember that episode, at least I think I'm remembering correctly, that the TARDIS sort of whisked itself off by itself, led the Doctor, Donna and Martha, to where that was all taking place and everything like that. And similarly so, do we have the TARDIS whisking Nardole away when Bill has fallen, thankfully not to her demise, in these underground tunnels on Mars. And it reminded me of that, again, calling back to that episode. But of course, Missy. Nardole goes to Missy. He can't figure out what is going on with the TARDIS. It seems for all intents and purposes locked. Now, we don't hear the cloister bell or anything like that. We do hear that grinding down of the TARDIS sound effect and everything like that. And so it's like the parking brake is on, I think the Doctor has said before. And so Nardole, his last nerve being broken, he seems more hapless in this episode, I have to say. He goes and requests of Missy assistance. And I was gobsmacked by that, and I really kind of felt like they should have put that sequence, like have the TARDIS leave, and then, follow up with him messing about in the TARDIS, trying to get it fixed, trying to, reorganize it, get back to Mars, having him fail, but not so quickly. I think they should have peppered him going to Missy later in the episode, because there was so much time there where it was just left hanging. And I was like, well, what the hell happened with that? There were a few down sequences there where they could have called back to it mid-episode or 3/4 of the way through, and then picked up with it again by the end when the TARDIS finally does return, and there is Missy in the TARDIS. The Doctor is horrified, barely able to speak. You realize you're going back in the vault, right? And of course, Missy's like, yes, don't worry about it. And I love his, what? Like, for a minute there when he said what, I was like, did I miss something? And I played it back and I'm like, no, he's just gobsmacked that she's agreeing. But what's she up to? She comes up to him, she pointedly comes up to him, are you okay? And they sort of slow-mo her looking him up and down, and I'm just like, what the hell? This has been the scenario of this whole series with Missy. Every single time she crops up, what the hell? I don't know what to make of it. And my chief assumption was, did she somehow, now being in control of the TARDIS, did between Nardole's going in and presumably freeing her of the vault and them showing up at the end of the episode, did she run amok somehow? Is this where the John Sim Master was put back into action or something? Was he, taken out of his timeline, and now there's timelines in conflict now between incarnations and such like that? I don't know. It was just, the whole episode was mystifying to me. And then the awesome sauce comes right, actually just before that, just before the whole Nardole Missy coming back to Mars thing. Alpha Centauri? Like, if you had told me, and now let me be clear, let me be forthright. I've not seen the Peladon stories. I've not seen those particular stories. I have only seen pictures in Doctor Who, like image guides and things of that, of the history of Doctor Who and everything, I've seen many a picture of Alpha Centauri. I didn't know what it was, who it was, anything like that. But I recognized it, and I had to look up, was that the name Alpha Centauri and everything like that, and refamiliarize myself with it, or at least bring myself up to speed to a point without having seen those episodes. And it was it was gobsmacking. If you had told me, especially pre-50th anniversary, that we'd see the Mondasian Cybermen, that we'd see Ice Warriors, that, all this kind of stuff, Silurians and whatever like that, coming back, especially under Moffat's reign, who he himself had come out and said at one point, classic monsters? Nah. Nobody's going to get those references and such like that. Which I'm beginning to believe was taken out of context since the very first time he ever uttered those words, and even I myself got pretty hot and bothered about. But if you had told me we would see Ice Warriors, we would see, Cybermen, Mondasian Cybermen, and all this kind of stuff, Cybermats and Cybermites, which was sort of a new creation, but you know where I'm going with this, all that kind of stuff, and then Alpha Centauri, Alpha friggin' Centauri, I would have called you a liar to your face. Bold-facedly so. And so that was interesting. That was a nice little nod to the classic series. And that's kind of why I say, after having read up on the character's name and where this character had cropped up before, as I knew it had, Alpha Centauri had, that's kind of why I say this was kind of sort of like Genesis of the Ice Warriors. Or at least, as I say, that aspect of the Ice Warriors, their culture that the Doctor in his previous incarnations, have had encounters with. And so, overall, this video, this recording, this review is probably about as wonky and strange and odd as I felt watching the episode, so I'm sure it's befitting for that. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of this particular episode, episode 9 of Series 10 of Doctor Who, Empress of Mars. If you loved it, all out and out, if you had any qualms about it, any issues with it as I did, feeling it was wonky, feeling like it was just more classic series vibe, and maybe a little all over the place in places and such like that, anything goes. Just love having that conversation. And so yeah, the next one looks just as interesting, and I hope it'll be better than my initial expectations. And yeah, I'll catch you all later. Peace.